Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Barber. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst and Program Manager here at AP4D, and would really like to welcome you all to this webinar today on education as a tool of statecraft. This is being live captioned, so if you'd like to see those captions, just navigate your way to the Zoom toolbar, click the little CC icon to get those displayed on your screen. You might need to access that through the little three-dot more button as well. So I'm joining you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'd like to acknowledge their elders, past and present, and pay my respects as well to any First Nations people who are joining the call today. We're really delighted that we've had more than 220 people register for this webinar. So that really shows, there's an appetite for this topic. It's an issue that's quite live at the moment. And it's really great to see everyone's interest in that from across all the different policy communities, from across government, think tanks, academia, civil society, etc. I think it's intuitive that education is important from a kind of domestic individual level. I'm sure everyone here reflects on their own experience in education, but I think what can often be overlooked is the contribution of education to Australian statecraft, which is really what AP4D is all about. So it's no surprise that we're looking at it from that angle. And we're really delighted today that we've got a great set of speakers who are going to kind of unpack that kind of idea that it's a foundation for national power, as well as a contribution across the board of defence and security, of international development, diplomacy and trade, as well as defence and security. So the kind of agenda, how we'll work through today is we'll first hear from Melissa. Soon we'll hear from Melissa Conley-Tyler, the Executive Director. She'll give a bit of an overview of the paper that we're launching. Then we'll hear from 4 people who contributed to it on those different kind of aspects of the contribution of education. We'll have time for Q&A, so please do get your questions ready throughout, and we'll get to those at that point and use the Zoom Q&A function for that as well. We're really delighted as well that we'll be joined at the end by Assistant Minister for International Education, Julian Hill, who's got a message for us to share with you about a response to the paper from him. But before we get to that, we're really delighted that we've got Sonia Neufeld, who's Director of DFAT's Development Communications and Partnerships section. They funded and supported the program that led to this paper, and she's just going to say a few words about why DFAT chose to support this project. So over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, everyone, for being here, those that are watching live and those that will watch the recorded version. And thank you especially to AP4D for this important work behind education as a tool of statecraft. Tom introduced me. I am the Director of Development Communications and Partnerships, but I'm also a former teacher. And I believe profoundly in the power of education. And so DFAT commissioned this paper for 3 reasons, and a few others, but I'll just cut it to 3. First, Australia's 2023 International Development Policy committed us to using our full range of national capabilities to build a peaceful, stable, and prosperous region. We wanted clearer thinking about how one of our strongest national assets, education, can actually be used more strategically as well as pragmatically. Second, education sits across government, universities, research institutions, business, and civil society. We needed a genuinely whole-of-nation perspective on how scholarships, research partnerships, skills training, and systems support can work together to advance Australia's regional goals. Third, education is one of Australia's clearest national interests. Australia invests hundreds of millions of dollars each year in education partnerships across our region, from scholarships at our own institutions to system strengthening in partner countries. Because an educated region is a more stable, resilient, and prosperous region. It's really quite straightforward. Strong education systems underpin economic growth. They underpin effective institutions, and they underpin social cohesion. They build our region's capacity to confront the complex shared challenges we face now and those that we're going to face in the future, many of which are unknown. So this paper helps us think more deliberately about aligning Australia's education strengths with our regional ambitions, and about working across the sectors that we're all in to deliver impact. DFAT looks forward to working with many of you and many other partners to translate these very valuable ideas in this paper into practical cooperation. It's going to be vital going forward, particularly in the new geostrategic context. Finally, and especially, I would like to acknowledge Melissa Conley-Tyler, Tom, Grant, Heather, and the whole AP4D community, which is very large. And I want to thank you beyond just this paper. Over 6 years, AP4D created something genuinely valuable in Australia's policy landscape. You brought development, diplomacy, and defence voices into the same room. You built a trusted, credible forum and voice for whole-of-nation thinking. You helped Australia see that development, diplomacy, and defence are not separate conversations, but parts of our shared national effort. And this paper is an acute example of that. Your work has strengthened Australia's policy debate, and I think that this paper is very valuable as a final contribution. And your efforts across those 6 years and all of the sectors you've covered and done research on and drove conversations on will continue to shape how Australia thinks about our region and our responsibilities in it for a very long time to come. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sonia. It's great to hear that this paper, it can help be kind of a starting point or an introduction for a lot of people and help kind of continue that conversation around the importance of education. And it's just on behalf of the AP4D team as well. It's been great to be involved and work with DFAT on not just this program, but other programs previously. So really appreciate those comments. And I'll now turn to Melissa to give a bit of an overview of some of the key points of the paper.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Sonia, for those words. I have a nice, simple job today, which is just to share the results from the work we've done on education as a tool of statecraft. And as Sonia said, this is coming from AP4D's long-term work, looking at the different tools of statecraft or national capabilities, however you want to put that, and how they can come together in a whole-of-nation way. So some of you may have been at the launch of our Whole of Nation Approach paper a bit over a year ago now by the Minister for Foreign Affairs and then Shadow Minister. And the concept we had there is very strongly this idea that there is more than just our core foreign policy actors who are helping make international policy. So the core foreign policy actors, they know they do foreign policy. They work at DFAT or defence or the development sector and national intelligence. But then there's the whole rest of the country, whether that's media or sport or community or First Nations or state governments. They're constantly talking to the world. And so that whole of nation is how can we get them to coordinate a bit better to harness for the national interest. So this paper focused specifically on education as one of those sectors that is constantly talking to the world. We had a long, involved, but very enjoyable consultation process over a number of months, where we talked to a wide range of people from across the education sector. And when I say that, we're thinking schools, technical and vocational education, universities, research, but also sort of school and education policy and systems. We talked to 105 people over the consultation period, and I would like to thank every single one of them for that. It was an extraordinary group that we were able to talk to. Now, some of them, they sat down and they gave us their serious thoughts in an interview. Others had the misfortune to be sitting next to me at a dinner and I pounced on them. Some sent us through the research that they were doing. For some, I was able to actually see the work in person, such as in Timor-Leste, where I went for a study tour with the Australian International Development Network, and I could see Australia's education sector working on the ground. So obviously, what we've done is a synthesis. There's nothing in the paper that is for any individual. But I hope overall you can get a sense of some of the areas of consensus, but also some of the areas where there weren't consensus when you look at the paper. Now, the first area I'd say there was consensus on is that education matters. And that's perhaps not surprising. But I think what was very interesting was that there was such a positive view about the idea of education as a tool of statecraft. So with everyone we spoke to, I never got pushback against that framing. I think there was a strong sense that education is a national asset, and that it's a resource that helps Australia achieve its international goals. We heard a lot about countries who are working very hard on their education sectors as competitive edge. And I think we heard that there can be a danger that Australia could sometimes take the education sector for granted, or see it with a primarily domestic lens, as being about issues of housing or something else. Whereas the idea that education has so much to offer for what it helps us in our international aims, I think that came through strongly. And we put those in, I suppose, in two different ways. One, at the foundation level, that education helps build the foundation of national power, skills, productivity, informed citizens, etc. And then as an outward-facing tool, it can do so much for our defence, diplomacy, development and trade aims. So one of the things we always try to manage at AP4D is to get a killer graphic. And this is the moment to thank our wonderful graphic designer, Kate. You can see here we've tried to pull this together into, I hope, an appropriately generative image of a tree and growth. So when we're talking foundations of national power, you can see we're talking workforce, skills, whether those are language, technical skills, also bringing in global talent, innovation. If those are all very important for Australia, education is where you get them. And also the informed citizen side, critical thinking, civics, etc. We've then looked at each of those different domains, defence and security, diplomacy and trade, international development, and given a sense of the way that education helps us achieve those aims. Now, in terms of, what other areas of consensus I heard so strongly, I'm going to share some of the voices that we heard, because that's one of the most exciting things for us, is just hearing people articulate so well. So as I say, I think there was a clear consensus on the value of education as a tool of statecraft, and it should be a central pillar in our international engagement. And one thing that came through really strongly is the sense that the education sector exists for the public good. Now, that may be obvious to people within the sector, but sometimes there can be very negative narratives. And I think what came through this was a positive, future-facing, propositional narrative about education as a public good institution that can do so much for our international aims. Now, we saw in the consultations how many examples there are, and I'm talking many dozens of examples of exactly, of real case studies where the education sector is directly contributing either to the foundations of national power or to our defence, diplomacy or development aims. What came through was that so much more could come from that if we knitted it together in a more coherent framework. So we heard very strongly that there's an appetite for collaboration from the education sector. There's a desire for more clarity about roles and having a coherent national approach that understands the value of education to contribute to statecraft. Another thing that came through strongly in the consultations was a sense of the threats to the education sector. And I put it as strongly as saying a sense of fragility. You can see there the sort of things we heard from people. Some of the voices were very concerned that this it is possible to destroy a sector. It could be something sudden, crises and collapses, or it could be something longer, where poor student experience over time reduces the desire of people to engage with Australian education. And if we think about what's happening in other countries, if we think about what's happened at other times, I think we can't take for granted that we have this extraordinary asset. Now, on the positive side, I think there were a lot of opportunities. So the quality of Australia's education came out strongly, not just in rankings, which I know are contested, but if, for example, in the desire and demand for Australian education, for example, in our neighbours across Southeast Asia. The situation in the US was mentioned by a few people as a potential opportunity for Australia, something we could really capitalise on, as was technological change as another area that Australia can capitalise on technology for our education sector broadly. So I hope I haven't covered it too much because I want you all to read the paper. But what we have asked is, we've asked 4 of the people who were involved in discussions to talk a little bit about those different parts of the tree, the foundations of national power, and then from a defence development diplomacy perspective. And we did think about who we chose. Each of the people who are joining us are a part of the AP4D journey. So speaking about the development side will be Richard Moore, who, along with Bridie Rice, was the founding co-convener of AP4D. They were the people who had the idea, who went and got the first co-chairs, the first group together, and made it happen. Rowan Titus is going to talk to us about defence and security. He's now with ANU, National Security College, but he was previously with the Australian Civil Military Centre. And ACMC was the first organisation to offer some seed funding to AP4D. 6 months seed funding originally to see, is anyone interested in this? Does anyone across defence diplomacy development want to talk to each other? And if they do policymakers want to hear what they say? And Rowan, we'd like to thank everyone at ACMC for the support that made this possible. We also have Susanna Patton from the Lowy Institute, who is also a member of our advisory group. And this is my opportunity to thank all the members of the advisory group, right from the beginning, including those who aren't with us anymore, like Alan Gingell and Brendan Sargent, and people who've been involved in the advisory group for the whole journey. Their guidance, their spur to always get better has been really important. And lastly, I'd like to, we'll be welcoming Jung Nijde from AsiaLink Education. And she doesn't know, but she'll be standing in for all of the organisations who we've consulted with over our years. I think we're heading up to well over 1,000 people who've been involved in one or more of our consultations, whether it's online, dialogue, etc. And we've really appreciated the chance to showcase their work, to give them a forum and a platform to take their ideas to a policy audience. So with that rather long introduction, but I hope many thanks, I'm now going to turn to our panel. So Jung, we asked you to do the bottom of the tree, if we can, the foundations of national power. And I think you've got a bit of a handle on both of those aspects, both the sort of human capital side and the informed citizen side in your work previously with ACER and now your work with AsiaLink. So please give us a bit of a sense of how you see education contributing at that foundation.
Sure, thanks, Melissa. I see lots of former and current colleagues in the room, so thank you everyone for joining. Let me first start with the good news. So as the report has highlighted, Australia is well recognised as having a world-class education system. And this stems from our strong policy environment and regulatory frameworks that promote high quality and standards in guiding the school and higher education sectors. In recent years, we have been a standout in initiating policies around safeguarding of student learning and well-being, And of course, an example more recently is our bold policy that looks at the social media ban for children under 16. And the world is watching us on this one. But at the school level, we are also known for our innovation in teaching and learning that promotes inquiry-based learning, creative expression, innovation, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills. And in fact, the latest program for international student assessment showed that Australian students were well above the OECD average on the creative thinking assessment task. And this bodes well for how Australian students are prepared to engage in an increasingly connected and complex future world of work. And now the not so good news. And I should say up front that these challenges are not typical to Australia. It is facing our region and many jurisdictions across the world. Australia is facing a reading crisis. According to a report published by the Grattan Institute in 2024, it showed that 1 in 3 children cannot read proficiently. And these students are more likely to fall further behind their peers. They're more likely to become disruptive in the classroom and then drop out of school altogether. For these students, this represents an estimated $40 billion cost to Australia's economy over their lifetimes. Secondly, we are facing an equity problem. And despite our recent initiatives to promote inclusion and social wellbeing in the classroom in recent years, significant equity gaps persist. And these are driven by social economic background, location, where rural and regional students face immense barriers, language, and also Indigenous status. Thirdly, we are also facing a teacher shortage. Teachers are leaving the profession, and it's no wonder. According to confronting research conducted by the Australian Council for Educational Research a year ago, 90% of teachers cited workload as a key concern, and more than 70% worry about the complexity of student needs, including student experiences with self-harm, suicide, being overdiagnosed or overmedicated. The authors call for more support from school leadership, better school-based resources and tools for educators and families. So in an increasingly interconnected world, how can we leverage education as a tool for nation building and to promote our public diplomacy and international development goals? One is to focus on human capital development and building our own capability by getting the foundations right. This means a focus on literacy, numeracy, and social emotional skills. 2 is fostering social cohesion so that we can build a more just and equitable society. 3 is to prepare our young people to be global citizens by dismantling traditional educational transactions and engaging in more partnerships and collaboration with our regional neighbours. We do have a lot to learn from other world-class learning systems in our region, such as Singapore. So to give an example of what we're doing, I can talk about very quickly a flagship program at AsiaLink, the Bridge School Partnership Program, which has been running for almost 20 years, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where schools from across Asia partner with those in Asia and the Pacific to foster intercultural understanding and professional learning for its educators, including school exchange visits, as well as student projects that tackle some of the shared issues that's facing our region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you're going to get, I'm sure you're going to get questions from this. So I will be asking people who would like to continue the discussion, please start putting your questions in the Q&A. If you can't see it, you press the three little dot button, find the Q&A, and please give us your thoughts. So I'll now move to Richard Moore, if I can. who's a strategic advisor at the Development Intelligence Lab. And if we've done the foundations of the tree, Richard, I'd like you to do the development branch, please. Development is, I think, gains much from the education sector across research, capacity building, evaluation. Please give us your thoughts.
Thanks, Melissa. I'd say at the outset that I wasn't involved in any of the consultations or the preparations of the paper, so I've come to this afresh. And I think it's a somewhat surprising paper because it's very accessible. It's also very broad-ranging, but it does put its finger on several very important themes. And for me, the things that stood out were the historic scale and strength of Australia's education systems, the centrality of quality to what those systems can actually produce domestically and internationally, and the warning signs that all is not well. Now, one of the striking things about the paper for me was the consistency of the comments. And I agree that there is a shared analysis and a shared consensus on many things, on a surprising number, perhaps. And as somebody whose first career was in the education sector, tertiary and secondary, I can join that consensus. So I feel this warm inner glow that's permeating all of these discussions, and that's good, but it doesn't mean, of course, that education is the only thing that's important or that everything we do in the education sector is equally effective. Firstly, every interest group in Australia argues that what it does is the secret sauce for international development. Engineers, medicos, agricultural scientists. So whenever we're making the case, that case has to be very strong and well presented. The second point is that no matter what the merits of various investments or various sectors, development choices have to be nutted out country by country in individual context, and there's very hard choices to be made. We need a lot of data. We need a lot of expertise. We look in order to make good judgments, but there's no silver bullet, and that includes education. Now, that said, I think there are very good reasons why education is a bedrock sector of Australia's international development efforts and comprises a major part of most programs. And just to recap on two or three things, I mean, we've led a 70-year effort through the development program to assist regional countries upgrade the skills of over 50,000 policymakers and service deliverers. And this effort was pioneered by forward-looking ministers in the Menzies government. Now, is that Malcolm Turnbull asking, where are they now? Perhaps, but it was the development program also that allowed the tertiary sector to internationalize and led to the huge industry that we have today. So complex interactions there that have been mutually beneficial. In addition, we've helped in the construction of literally thousands of classrooms in Indonesia and took the advantage to twin schools with Australian schools into the bargain. In the Philippines, where I live, we've undertaken massive system-wide reforms in conjunction with government, and we certainly prioritize getting kids back into school post-COVID in Pacific and Southeast Asia. So these are tremendous long-term achievements. And Australia's tertiary sector has been particularly important in small countries and in those undergoing transition from one system to another. In Laos, Cambodia, Timor-Leste, as they opened up to the world, and in Pacific Island states, often very small countries, where we've been able to train a core cadre of public policy decision makers essential to their sovereignty and resilience. And there have been moments when the majority of cabinet members in some regional countries have been Australian educated, providing extraordinary opportunities for access and influence. And as the paper notes, this is built on trust, quality, and culture, all of which need to be nurtured. It can't be taken for granted. The World Bank has concluded, and I quote, education is one of the strongest instruments for reducing poverty, improving health, promoting gender equality, peace, resilience, and adaptation to climate change. That's not bad. One of the greatest attributes of education assistance is the way it can benefit individuals, communities, and the state simultaneously. It was the US economist Gary Becker in the 1960s who popularized the phrase human capital. And that was pivotal in getting policymakers to think about the economic return on education and health. You may have noticed how infrastructure's place in the development program has been rising lately, while in the last 7 years, Australia's education assistance has declined more than a quarter. Now, there's ebbing and flowing all the time. Those ratios are not fixed. But I do think the economic case for education needs further bolstering in our development work. We've got good quantitative analysis on how much education adds to individual earnings. Globally, it's about 10% for every added year of schooling. And we have a new paper from Amory Gethin. It's been endorsed by the World Bank. He studied the period 1980 to 2019 and found that improvements in education explained 45% of global growth and 60% of the income gains for the poorest people. That's pretty phenomenal and deserves a very wide audience. So we've got a good story to tell. We've got a large, skilled workforce, although, as we've been told already, many challenges to confront. An additional unrecognized asset that leapt out to me in the paper is the prevalence of a development mindset amongst educators who are emphasizing collaboration, exploration, joint problem solving, mutual respect. This suggests to me that the sector is ripe to be the leader of post-project whole-of-nation development cooperation instead of working through over-designed, micromanaged bottleneck projects. We should be able to find new ways to draw much more directly on the extensive capabilities that we have. Now, final word on something that doesn't feature, understandably, in the paper, and that's AI. Now, clearly, we're in a bit of a fog at the moment, but this technology is going to revolutionize the education sector and almost everything else. It's going to have immense socio-economic, political impacts. And if much more difficult is it going to be for others with less capacity, particularly the smaller countries? The potential for bad actors to take advantage of this is absolutely enormous. I think we need to put our normal and very understandable academic caution to the side and more vigorously stimulate, contribute to, and make sense of what's happening, while also proactively reaching out to our partners to help them do the same. Many thanks.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm not sure anyone else could put as many ideas, thoughts, and provocations in 5 minutes as you do. So everybody, there must be responses to that. Please put in the Q&A any thoughts you have. It can be reflections. We would love to see how you're responding. So I'm going to move now to Susanna Patton, who is a former diplomat now at the Lowy Institute. And Susanna, you've looked a lot at obviously the power of diplomacy as a tool, but also education within diplomacy. So please give us your sense of that branch of the tree.
Thank you so much, Melissa and AP4D, for having me. Congratulations on the paper. I very much come to this discussion not as an education specialist, but as an analyst of Australia's relations with Southeast Asia. So that's just a little bit of a caveat about some of the limits of my knowledge here. But I want to structure my remarks around the idea that successful foreign policy and soft power involve playing to our competitive advantage and asking ourselves a very basic question, which is, what are we good at? Australia is a middle power in a region dominated by large economies and increasingly assertive great powers. We can't compete with China on the scale of public or private investment. We can't match the United States or Japan on defence spending or on manufacturing capability. We're a services economy. So even when it comes to European countries, we're going to be outpaced when it comes to manufacturing investment in the region. Even thinking about soft power in particular, research which I did last year at the Lowy Institute on Southeast Asia showed that Australia's media, whether it's TV, radio, broadcasters, has really limited reach beyond the Pacific. So what is Australia good at? Education is the obvious answer. I think even notwithstanding the obvious challenges that the sector is facing and which are highlighted in the paper. The paper also, I think, includes really interesting data from the Development Intelligence Lab, a survey they did in Southeast Asia, which showed that among Southeast Asian experts who were asked what they wanted from Australia as a partner, education was the #1 ask, which I think really reinforces something which is, very common sense to those of us who've worked on the region, that it is how Australia is seen. And as the AP4D paper points out really well, Australia is at least a top 10 country when it comes to education, punching well above its weight in terms of, at least one metric of institutional rankings. And the fact that Australia is an English-speaking country is obviously an enduring source of attractiveness to international students. I wrote a paper about this topic in 2022 for the Lowy Institute, and I was really trying to make this argument, which was that education is really the foundation of our relationships with the region, but we weren't treating it that way, and we were managing it as a revenue stream instead. That Colombo Plan generation, the ministers, central bank governors, senior officials across the region who studied in Australia and have a deep connection to Australia are obviously retiring or retired already. And of course, the soft power argument isn't that these alumni will automatically support Australian positions. They won't, and we shouldn't expect them to, but education does create those connections between people, institutions, and governments that are really the foundation for anything else that we might want to do. One, I think, just little sort of case study or example that I wanted to point to about the way that we're potentially underinvesting in education. And I think Richard's already touched on this in the development context, but, I would add to that, looking at it through a foreign policy lens, would be with, in the case of Indonesia, which, our Prime Minister says there's no more important relationship to Australia than Indonesia. Hugely populous country. Last year I had the opportunity to attend the Australia Awards Alumni Gala dinner in Jakarta, and really spectacular event and really amazing people and connections that have been created by these alumni who studied in Australia. But one thing that's very striking is that in 2025 Australia only provided 165 long-term Australia Awards scholarships to a country as populous as Indonesia. And I don't want to reduce everything to a binary China competition lens, but China's ambassador to Indonesia is on the record as saying that China has awarded more than 800 full government scholarships to Indonesia between 2017 and 2023. So I would say, based on that, they are at least doing as much in that space, if not more. So I think, and this is the country that we say is the most important to us. So I think that little, comparison there will hopefully focus minds on the fact that, Australia needs to really match the rhetoric with resourcing. Another thing that I drew attention to in that paper from 2022 was the fact that Australia also doesn't have a merit-based scholarship for international students beyond the Australia Awards, which obviously also have a development focus. And I think that potentially limits the usefulness of the Australia Awards as a tool for targeting, a particular cohort of future leaders from the region who we might want to engage with. But it seems like the appetite is more towards increasing the number of short courses versus those longer term scholarship opportunities in Australia. So there's a lot more in the AP4D paper that I think is really, worth drawing attention to. I think the fact that the scope is very broad. Obviously, I've been talking about, in a sense, the most traditional and banal aspect of soft power, which is international students coming to Australia. But I think the fact that the paper includes vocational training programs, which is something that the region is really hungry for, all of those big challenges facing Southeast Asia, whether it's the digital transition, whether it's green economy, those are fundamentally skills challenges. And I think, Australian vocational education is critical there, as well as those research partnerships like the example that's given about ACR's role, I think is really compelling. So I guess the practical implication of all of this is that Australia needs to be doubling down on education precisely because it is the space in which we're best placed to compete. And I think that the vision that this paper presents of Australia as a country that genuinely sees education as a central pillar for its engagement with the world is very compelling. The comparative advantage is there, and the question is whether or not we're going to use it, or whether we're going to kind of continue pursuing other pathways and other emphases that might actually be less effective compared to a focus that's education, that has education at its centre. So I'll leave it there and really look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Susanna. And I think that's a really strong call. I would love to hear views from people in this Zoom room on how they see those issues, you know, the comparative advantage, how do we unleash that, how do we focus on it? So I'm now going to turn to Rowan Titus, who's currently seconded to the ANU National Security College from the Department of Home Affairs. So he's someone who's been in policy and delivery for a very long time and is currently based at ANU. And I'm looking forward to your thoughts, Rowan, on the defence and national security part of our trip.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Can I just start by adding to Tom's comments at the beginning? Daura nuna, daura nanawal, yangu nalamanyin, dunimanyin, nunawalwari, daurawari, dindi, yangila wijidnin. I'm coming at you from Ngunnawal country. It's an absolutely spectacular day here in Gunning, north of Canberra. When you first asked me to speak about defence and security contributions through education, I started the sort of thought about how I was going to discuss this, thinking about how the defence institutions of this country engage with international partners through courses at Duntroon, ADFA, short courses with the military, exercises, training and capacity building, all of those sorts of things, and how wonderful those are. And then I thought, we can also leverage how academic institutions teach security studies and defense studies and international relations and development studies, and how international partners come and study here, acquiring those skills, and how that puts us all on a common ground for moving forward. And then I was going to talk about New Colombo Plan and how sending our young undergrads overseas into the region helps cross-pollinate all of that. And there was this beautiful synergy between Jung, Richard, and Susanna's points and all of that. So I'm just going to say, let's take all of that as read rather than repeating the things they were going to say. And I'm going to focus instead on a few other aspects of defense and security that we don't normally think about in the context of all of this. And I just want to challenge a few of our premises that underpin the whole concept of education. And I saw this coming through in the report. And so I'm going to tease them out of the report. So firstly, the biggest premise we have is that our education system is superior to other offerings in the region. And I want to challenge that. And Susanna mentioned, I think, or maybe Jung mentioned Singapore, but all through the region, there are challenges to that assumption, and a really critical need for us to re-engage in the investment part of the R&D of the mechanics of our pedagogy, and also what we're teaching and how, right? So all of that is a critical piece that I think the report does bring out the need for us to continually invest in the quality of the product. And I think that's really important if we're going to be a key provider in the Indo-Pacific, just as a passive provider of defense and security awareness, in that we have a country that's somewhere where foreign students want to come and where they learn. We need to provide the best possible source. We need to stay first class, in short. Secondly, there's a premise, and Susanna mentioned this in the context of Indonesia, where once educated here, the individual will self-identify that they have a connection to Australia. And whenever we need them, they'll pop up as required in order to do that. And those of us who've had the fun experience of working overseas, trying to harness our graduate cohort from overseas, our fellow students who we might want to reach out or have something to do with, will know that that doesn't happen passively. And instead, we need to ensure that this dividend from our investment is nurtured and maintained. And I think that's really critical for us to do. And the last of my three premises is that the traditional defence and security disciplines are where we should continue our focus in engagement in defence and security, in that we should look at international partners, talking about international relations, so on and so on and so on. But actually, we might want to think about digging a little bit deeper, and that's where I'm going to go with the next couple of minutes. So, for instance, if we want Australia's education system to support our future defence and security, we need to look at our future defence, our future workforce, and the needs of our future workforce, and those are big numbers. So, for instance, Bureau of Statistics last year said our workforce should be increasing by about 180,000, 185,000 per year. And of that cohort, I wonder how many are defence strategic studies graduates or international relations graduates or development studies graduates, and how many are STEM graduates or as according to the submarine agency, we need 4,000 graduates coming out of the system between 2024 and 2027 to enter just to support the AUKUS arrangements we have. We need somewhere in the vicinity of 16,000 jobs in our mining sector for critical minerals and supply chains. And we also need in our space industry something like 20,000 new jobs over the next decade. And these emerging national security defense sector jobs are also the very things that will attract those in our region with similar interests in their national securities rather than the traditional ones, the traditional subjects. So it bears thinking about that this investment in soft power through education not only serves our actual infrastructure needs domestically, but also our regional needs. So if we are to be world-class in these new technologies, these new developing industries, that investment is also going to provide a soft power dividend in our region, particularly in Southeast Asia and South Asia, and a very viable alternative to the other potential providers who are not competing with us in our region, but who are very, very much binary choices for our partners. So they either go towards the west or towards the east to learn these things. And I look particularly at somewhere like India, which has to decide between national security investment in Russia or in the United States if it wants to move forward on defense industry. So there is a material advantage to us in investing heavily in developing these industries, both domestically and internationally. And lastly, just a pitch to my former DFAT colleagues. Melissa mentioned I was with Defence and now I'm with Home Affairs, but I actually spent most of my career in DFAT. Just a small point which I'd like to raise in support of them And that is that these networks don't manage themselves, and they can't be left to an overworked, locally engaged staff member to manage on an Excel spreadsheet, or to an academic institution's alumni board, or staff organizing things for visiting vice chancellors to look up who graduated from a particular city and see if they're still around for an event. It's got to be much more strategic and coordinated than that. And I think if we are to harness the massive potential, we've got to look at this as a large data model and actually invest in it as a large data model and manage it as such in the national interest. All those who have a connection to Australia through education, going back over the years, not just the Menzies era Colombo Plan governors and so on, but also given social media and the influencing done by recent and new graduates. And I'm looking specifically at the 111 participants in this conversation. I wonder how many of you have already hashtagged or tweeted or shared something about today, or will do so very soon. Far more influential than anything I'm going to do over the next 48 hours, I can absolutely assure you. So I think channeling that would be super, super, super useful. Anyway, I've spoken enough. I just want my final comment is to just give the hugest plug to AP4D. It's been so lovely working with you. You've done some spectacular stuff. I've taken your publications and thrown them all around the world and pointed to things and gesticulated to power and influence people and saying, "See, it's in print. You have to do this." So I strongly want to wish you all the very, very best moving forward. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Rowan. And we feel the same. It's been such a pleasure. Now, I'm conscious we do have the Minister, Assistant Minister to come. So what I think I'm going to do is go to each of our panellists to respond to whichever of the questions they're most interested in responding to. And anything that they can't get to verbally, they can start typing answers. I've also welcomed Grant Wyatt, who is the AP4D staff member who was the editor of this paper. And so if there's anything that he heard from consultations that he would like to come in with, I'll come into him last. So, Yung, what would you like to respond to? We have questions in there from, I think, from Carolyn Jones, from Tetra Tech, some interesting ones you might want to look at. What would you like to cover?
Wow, okay. So maybe I can start with, there was a question from Bill about how Australia can work with our partners and they're working alongside them, recognising their systems and skill sets and areas that they have and their own histories. I can say that in the education sector, what I found most effective when we come in is to say that we actually share the same problems that you do. We don't have all the answers. Teacher shortages, it's a common problem for us in Australia as well. So we are starting from where they're at. I think in terms of our implementation approaches in some of these contexts can be quite disarming, and it creates a common ground for us to continue to work together in partnership. So in my experience, that's something that has worked well when we're working with, whether it's government or civil society groups.
Great. Okay, and to Richard, we have many development ones. For example, Liam Moore from JCU or Lauren Sullivan. What would you like to respond to?
Well, it occurred to me that several go to the question of how we can make sure that what we're doing internationally maintains our reputation, is non-extractive, and is genuinely whole of nation whilst attending to the needs of the communities and the countries and the individuals that we work with. So I think there is a big question there. I tried to broach it very quickly in talking about a post-project world, which I really think we have to move into now. And I would see DFAT's role in that changing as well, to be more facilitative, and bringing the parties together in Australia and also linking them up with their counterparts overseas and really holding the ring. And I think, you know, our diplomacy is fitful. On a good day, we know how to work for the long-term benefit, but an awful lot of decision making is transactional and short term, and that's the bit we really need to tackle. And I think there's an ongoing dialogue with the political level on that front.
God. Okay, Susanna, to you. What would you like to respond to?
I think, you know, there were some questions about how do we ensure that, you know, that geopolitics doesn't distort education partnerships. And I think that's a really interesting question. It was something that I saw, you know, in the report, that among those who were consulted, obviously you heard different perspectives about the extent to which education and research partnerships should be shielded from geopolitics or should be a function of geopolitics. Like, my own very kind of pragmatic view as someone on the foreign policy side is that, you know, anything that can drive focus and interest in education is a good thing. And if that means that it needs to be done through a geopolitical competition lens, then maybe that's a necessary ill, and that, you know, we should just, you know, go with that. But obviously there are some other specific areas as well, especially when it comes to the experiences that students have on an individual level, where you don't want geopolitics to be part of your narrative.
Okay, and Rowan.
Wow, thank you. There were some really great questions. I'm going to lean into the geology question, bearing in mind I'm not a geologist, I'm just a nerd, so I'm really interested in that whole discussion about rare earths and critical minerals. So first and foremost, we do not have the capacity in Australia to take rare earths and refine them to final product stage. These things are absolutely essential for strong magnets, for a whole range of other modern diverse manufacture products, and but they're needed in such minute quantities that it's not commercially viable to extract them just for their own sake. It's only as a part of the supply chain for a much more elaborately transformed manufacture that they become valuable. Sorry for the aside, but it's important to answer the question. Now, China dominates that market, meaning that if they turn off the tap, then those countries that need those things will suffer. There is only one supply chain for powerful magnets that does not intersect with China somewhere along its pathway, and that starts in Australia and moves via a couple of other stops, including Malaysia and Europe, to Japan. So in order for us to lean into this, if Australia invests in geology and earth sciences, which if you look outside, you'll see a lot of holes in the ground where we're extracting this stuff, we can actually be a world leader and an alternative source for this science. That's only going to work if we open ourselves up to foreign students coming in and also studying here, because our own needs are too small for these schools to be viable in their own right. That's
thank you. Now,
national security
I am going to have
priority.
to stop you here, Rowan.
No, I'll stop
what
there.
I'm going to ask is all of our speakers, please do type some more thoughts in here. I'm conscious we hate that we don't give you as much time as we would like. And I'm going to have to say the same for you, Richard, if you wouldn't mind typing. Grant, just 1 minute, anything that you'd like to respond, and then we've going to have to go to the minute.
Thanks, Melissa. I'll just mention something quickly that came up through the consultations that hasn't really been brought up here, is that Australian universities are doing very well at reaching out to Southeast Asia at the moment, you know, and South Asia as well, with Deakin now in India. But there's the need to move to actually expend resources in the Pacific. There may not be the money there in the Pacific, but the educational need is there in the Pacific, And there's also unique research that needs to be conducted in the Pacific that requires support as well. So that's something that came through the consultations.
And thank you for sharing that. That was a strong theme. Now, what I'm hoping is that we haven't actually answered all of the questions, because what we want you to do above all is read the paper. So please follow the link, go and read. And many of the questions that have come in Q&A, I think you'll find some more there. So not having managed time as well as I should have, I'm now going to go to the Minister's message. So the Honourable Julian Hill MP is the Assistant Minister for International Education. And as we usually do for an AP4D paper, we asked him to give a policymaker's response to what he read in this paper.
I want to thank you for the invitation to say a few words. Now, I firmly believe that everything on Teams or Zooms feels about 5 times as long as in person, so I'll keep this brief. The work you do and the subject of this paper contributes to a debate that really matters right now as we think about the future of Australia's international education sector. Australia has a long history of being a global leader in international education. Since the 1950s, education has played a key role in building cultural diversity, people-to-people links, but also Australia's influence and global standing in our region. Soft power, in some senses. International education has matured over this time, now as an instrument of Australia's statecraft, strengthening global ties through both institutional but also people-to-people linkages worldwide. It is both a key enabler of the traditional domains of statecraft in various ways, foreign affairs, defence, trade and aid, international development, but also a pillar in its own right, part now of Brand Australia. Now, I don't think, though, that the value of international education to Australia is frankly widely appreciated by many. The public understanding of the sector and the focus of policy has been predominantly on the economic contribution, be it GDP, jobs or university revenue, and that remains important. But looking at the geopolitical circumstances around us, I believe we need to more directly value our international education and skills sector as a national asset, important for building and maintaining enduring relationships with our partners. For the onshore component, the decision to study in Australia is a life-changing one. We value the fact that students are making a conscious choice to come here, usually young people to spend some of their formative years here. But we can't take it for granted, though, that people will forever choose to come to our country to study, to learn and to live. The global market is hyper-competitive and dynamic. And many countries, traditionally viewed as source markets, are ramping up their own international education offerings and becoming competitors and partners too. And so it's important that Australia remains on the front foot, attracting the world's best and brightest to study with us. Over the past decade, Australia has helped to educate more than 3 million people from around the world. International education connects us to the world and is both a source of innovation and a foundation for lifelong friendships. The global capabilities that are built in our classrooms when domestic students learn alongside international students will help Australia's international engagement and will underpin our bilateral relationships long into the future. International education also helps our students become truly global citizens, internationalising our regions, our cities, our campuses and classrooms. And for those students who choose to come and study in Australia and then return home, they take with them a little bit of Australia for the rest of their lives. Many go on to become leaders in their home countries. Education also contributes directly to our international objectives and regional development priorities, whether that's through transnational education in Southeast Asia or South Asia that provides in-country access for students who mightn't be able to come and study in Australia, whether for economic reasons or just sheer numbers of people who want to come, or supporting our partners in South Asia to mature their own university sectors or education aid in the Pacific. The transformative effect of education is powerful. It wins us friends and it keeps us connected and at the forefront of new knowledge. Australians can be proud of our international education sector as a national asset. Yes, it's our fourth biggest export sector right now, worth more than $50 billion in GDP, supporting more than 250,000 Australian jobs and all that stuff. But increasingly, it's a tool of Australian statecraft. So thank you for this contribution, which I'll draw on in developing the International Education Strategic Framework, along with Minister Jason Clare and Andrew Giles, to be finalised this year.
And with that, we are going to come to an end. So I thank the Assistant Minister. I thank all of the speakers today and everybody who has joined us. And I thank everybody who has been part of AP4D's journey. This event's been recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel. We ask you, please do share either the recording or the paper with your networks to get these messages out as much as they can. We'll be sharing this paper on education as a tool of statecraft at the Universities Australia conference next week, and we will continue through blogs and wherever we can to be promoting these messages. For your reference, the AP4D website and YouTube channel will remain accessible after we finish up at the end of the month. And we very much thank the Australian Council for International Development for continuing to host that so that the work can continue to have impact and leave a legacy. So with that, thank you so much again to everyone on the call, and I'm sure we will be seeing you in many other ways.